Meet the women of the Wild West, bold, fierce, and untamed, who could outshoot, outdrink, and outwit any man who dared to challenge them. These fearless ladies shattered every mold society tried to impose, proving that they were not just equal to men but sometimes even surpassed them. Imagine a world dominated by men, where women weren't expected to do more than keep house, raise children, and mind their manners. Now imagine these women striding into that world like a storm, fearless and unapologetic. These women carved their place into the history of the Wild West, not with soft hands but with sharp shooting, daring deeds, and bold hearts. Take Annie Oakley, the petite sharpshooter who could knock a dime out of the air with a single bullet, a woman who, despite her small frame and delicate appearance, packed the power of a force of nature. Her legend didn't start in the grand arenas of the Wild West shows but in the humble woods of Ohio. Born Phoebe Ann Mosey in 1860, Annie's early life was anything but glamorous. Her family, struggling to survive, had little idea that their small, quiet daughter would rise to become one of the most famous women in America. Life demanded toughness from her, not just strength of will but also an unmatched skill with a rifle. She didn't pick up a gun for fame or glory. No, she picked it up to put food on the table for her struggling family. By her teenage years, Annie Oakley was already known as a sharpshooter in her local area, able to hit a target that most seasoned hunters would miss. Her accuracy with a rifle was legendary, and soon it would take her far beyond the backwoods of Ohio. When Frank Butler, a renowned marksman, rolled into town, he thought he could best her in a contest of skill. He thought wrong. Not only did Annie outshoot him, but she won his heart as well. Together, they became one of the most famous duos in the Wild West shows, captivating audiences with Annie's supernatural marksmanship. She could shoot the ash off a cigarette held in her husband's lips, and even the Crown Prince of Germany, Wilhelm, couldn't resist the challenge. Annie took aim at the cigar in his mouth, made her shot, and, with a gleam in her eye, joked that had he been her husband, she might have missed on purpose. That joke, laced with humor, carried a dark foreshadowing, as Wilhelm would later become Kaiser and lead Germany into the Great War. Annie Oakley wasn't just a performer, she was a trailblazer. She believed women should be able to defend themselves, not just from dangers in the wild but in every aspect of their lives. She even offered her services to President McKinley during the Spanish-American War, proposing to lead a regiment of female sharpshooters into battle. Though her offer was declined, one can only imagine the spectacle and the empowerment that would have come from Annie Oakley leading a battalion of women into combat. Her legacy didn't stop at the edge of the frontier, though. Annie Oakley paved the way for generations of women, showing them that they could step outside the roles society had built for them. That they could shoot, lead, and fight just as well as any man, if not better. Her story inspired songs, movies, and musicals, solidifying her place as not just a Wild West legend but an American icon. "Anything you can do, I can do better," she declared in spirit and in action, and no one could doubt it. Then there's Calamity Jane, born Martha Jane Canary in 1852. Her life reads like the script of an action-packed film, filled with gunfights, brawls, and unlikely acts of compassion. She was the eldest of 6 children, raised in the wilds of Missouri, where her family moved from place to place, chasing the promise of a better life. Jane learned quickly that life wasn't kind and waiting for good fortune was a fool's errand. After losing both parents in her teenage years, she took on the responsibility of caring for her younger siblings, which meant learning how to shoot, ride, and survive in a world that had little patience for weakness. Her reputation as Calamity Jane came later, through stories of her saving a military officer's life during an ambush. Though the true origins of her nickname are as wild and varied as her adventures. Calamity Jane was not a woman to be easily defined. One minute, she'd be nursing the sick with tenderness and care, and the next, she'd be drinking a man twice her size under the table. Before breaking into a brawl for the sheer fun of it. A paradox in petticoats, she was tough as nails but also had a heart big enough to carry the weight of the world. Her most famous connection was with Wild Bill Hickok, the legendary gunslinger. Their relationship was the subject of endless speculation and tall tales, with some claiming that they were lovers and others insisting they were simply comrades in arms. Whatever the truth, their stories became intertwined, forever linking their names in the annals of Wild West lore. Jane lived fast and died hard, but her legacy as one of the Wild West's most famous women endures. While both Annie Oakley and Calamity Jane represent two very different sides of the Wild West, they shared one thing in common: a defiance of the roles set for them. Where Annie was refined, skilled, and precise, Jane was rough, wild, and unpredictable. Both women were pioneers, not just in their skills with firearms but in the way they lived their lives on their terms. They didn't just exist in the Wild West, they owned it, shaping the landscape of a time when the frontier was as wild and untamed as they were. As the years have passed, their legends have grown, with each retelling adding new layers of adventure, danger, and defiance. But at the heart of their stories is the same truth. These women weren't just surviving in a man's world, they were conquering it. The Wild West may have faded into history, but the stories of Annie Oakley and Calamity Jane continue to inspire. They were more than just legends. They were real women who lived in a world that tried to tell them what they couldn't do. And they responded with bullets, grit, and a fierce independence that has stood the test of time. Their stories remind us that the Wild West wasn't just tamed by men on horseback but by women who dared to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. Revolvers in hand and courage in their hearts. And in the end, perhaps that is the greatest legacy they left behind: the understanding that daring to be different isn't just an option, sometimes it's the only way to truly live. Calamity Jane claimed to have been Wild Bill Hickok's close companion, possibly even his lover. Whether that claim holds any truth is murky, but what's undeniable is her devotion to him. When Hickok was gunned down in Deadwood in 1876, Jane made sure she was part of the story, insisting on tending his grave and weaving herself into his legacy. Even after his death, she was fiercely loyal to him, a loyalty that, true to her wild and unpredictable nature, led her to declare her wish to be buried next to him. And, in one of those strange twists of fate, she got her wish. Jane passed away in 1903, and despite the dubious nature of their relationship, she was laid to rest next to Hickok, forever linking their names in Wild West lore. Calamity Jane was as much a storyteller as she was a frontierswoman, and she didn't mind embellishing her exploits to make her tales more thrilling. In her autobiography, she claimed to have been an Army Scout, to have fought in several Indian wars, and even to have been a Pony Express rider, most of which was highly doubtful. But that was part of her charm. Her life was a mix of fact and fiction, each version of her story more outlandish and entertaining than the last. Calamity Jane didn't just live a wild life, she lived an unpredictable one, creating her own legend as she went along, with stories that blurred the lines between reality and myth. Then there's Belle Starr, the Bandit Queen, herself. Belle wasn't your typical gunslinger. She brought style and flair to the Wild West, turning her life of crime into a theatrical performance. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley in 1848 to a respectable Missouri family, Belle's early life seemed destined for quiet respectability. But that wasn't enough for her. After the Civil War, her family moved to Texas, and Belle found herself drawn to the danger and excitement of the outlaw life. She ditched her middle-class manners for something far more thrilling: outlaws, shootouts, and a life of infamy. Belle Starr was as notorious for her romantic entanglements as she was for her crimes. She had a particular fondness for bad boys, starting with Cole Younger, a member of the infamous James Younger gang. But Belle wasn't content with just being a sidekick. She wanted more. She married Jim Reed, a notorious outlaw, and together they embarked on a life of crime that would cement her place in Wild West history. Belle and Jim had 2 children, Pearl and Eddie, and their lives were a whirlwind of adventure, danger, and lawbreaking. But when Jim met an untimely end in a shootout, Belle didn't retreat into mourning. Instead, she found a new partner in crime, Sam Starr, a Cherokee cowboy who became her husband and partner in every sense of the word. With Sam, Belle Starr truly came into her own. Together, they ran a notorious hideout for outlaws, the Younger's Bend Ranch, where bandits could find refuge and stolen goods found new homes. Belle wasn't just another criminal, she was a criminal with style. Picture this: a woman in the 1880s riding side saddle in a velvet habit, a plume in her hat, pistols strapped to her hips, stealing horses as easily as she charmed her way out of courtrooms. Belle had a flair for the dramatic, and it worked in her favor. She was notorious for her horse thefts, and her reputation grew to such an extent that whenever something went missing, people would shrug and say, "It must have been Belle Starr." Whether she was guilty or not was almost irrelevant. Her legend had grown so large that her name was synonymous with outlaw. Belle's life was filled with court appearances, but even the law seemed to have a soft spot for her. She charmed judges, sheriffs, and jailers alike, often escaping punishment through sheer charisma and a dash of melodrama. One famous instance saw Belle declare in court, "I am a friend to any brave and gallant outlaw." A line so perfectly Belle Starr that it encapsulates her entire approach to life. She didn't just live on the wrong side of the law, she thrived there, turning her criminal exploits into performances that captivated the Wild West. But just as her life was filled with drama, so too was her death. In 1889, Belle Starr was mysteriously shot near her home in Oklahoma, and her murder remains unsolved to this day. The suspect list was as colorful as her life. Former lovers, disgruntled gang members, and even her own children were considered suspects. In true outlaw fashion, Belle's death only added to her legend, leaving the world with one final, unsolvable mystery. Belle Starr may have lived a life of crime, but she did it with style, flair, and a sense of drama that ensured her name would never be forgotten. The women of the Wild West, Annie Oakley, Calamity Jane, and Belle Starr, each carved out their own place in history, defying the norms of their time and creating legends that have endured for more than a century. Their stories, filled with danger, adventure, and just a little bit of embellishment, capture the essence of a time when the frontier was wild, and anything seemed possible. They weren't just women in a man's world. They were women who took that world by storm, showing that bravery, skill, and determination knew no gender boundaries. And while the Wild West may have been tamed long ago, the spirit of these women continues to inspire, reminding us that some legends never die. So, the next time you hear a tale of the Wild West, tip your hat to Belle Starr, the bandit queen who didn't just steal horses but also captured the hearts and imaginations of future generations. Yet she wasn't the only one who left her mark on that rugged frontier. Lillian Frances Smith, born in 1871 in Colville, California, was another trailblazing woman who defied convention. Practically born with a rifle in her hand, by the age of 7, she had already gained a reputation as a sharpshooter, leaving neighbors in awe and possibly a bit nervous for the local wildlife. It wasn't long before Buffalo Bill Cody himself took notice of her remarkable skill and invited her to join his famous Wild West show, propelling her into the spotlight. Lillian accepted the offer and thus began her dazzling career as a performer, sharpshooter, and occasional troublemaker. Her performances were nothing short of sensational, as she shot glass balls out of the air, hit moving targets while riding a galloping horse, and even extinguished candles with a single, precise shot. The crowd loved her for it. Imagine a modern-day rock star, only instead of a guitar, she wielded a rifle, and instead of strumming strings, she hit every bullseye with ease. Her trick shots were so impressive that they would stun the audience into silence before they erupted into thunderous applause. Lillian had an uncanny ability to turn every show into a spectacle, striking dramatic poses and flashing a sly smile that seemed to say, "Yeah, I just did that." Inevitably, comparisons were drawn between Lillian and Annie Oakley, another star sharpshooter in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. But where Annie was modest and ladylike, Lillian was bold, confident, and flashy. She wore pants when other women wore skirts, smoked cigars, and challenged every expectation of how women were supposed to behave. This fearless attitude earned her fame and respect, though it also fueled a notorious rivalry with Annie. Lillian would sometimes boast that she was the better shot, adding a competitive edge that only heightened her allure in the public eye. In truth, whether she was the better shooter or not didn't matter. What mattered was that Lillian embraced the spotlight with a confidence that matched her skill, and people couldn't look away. Off stage, Lillian's life was just as colorful and unpredictable. She married several times, and rumors of secret marriages and romantic entanglements swirled around her like a dust storm on the prairie. Whether the tales were true or merely part of her growing mystique, they added another layer of intrigue to her persona. She lived life as adventurously as she performed, without fear, without restraint. As the years went on, however, the popularity of Wild West shows began to decline, and so too did the size of her audiences. But Lillian, ever the performer, continued to take the stage even when the crowds grew smaller. Eventually, she settled into a quieter life, though she never faded from the memory of those who had seen her in action. Her story is a testament to the fact that even in the rough, male-dominated world of the Wild West, there was room for women to not only survive but to thrive, to stand out, and to create lasting legends. Lillian Frances Smith did just that, with a sharp eye, a steady hand, and a smile that said she knew exactly what she was capable of. She wasn't just another figure in the Wild West. She was a force of nature, blazing a trail for other women to follow. So, the next time you hear tales of the Wild West, remember that the frontier wasn't just a place of rugged cowboys, dusty shootouts, and outlaws on horseback. It was also a place where women could outshoot the best, rob a stagecoach with finesse, and still have time to carve their names into the annals of history. These women, Annie Oakley, Calamity Jane, Belle Starr, and Lillian Frances Smith, were more than just legends. They were real, living, breathing symbols of defiance and bravery, who showed the world that the Wild West wasn't just for the men who rode its dusty trails, but for any woman bold enough to take it on. And perhaps, if you're lucky, as you listen to these stories, you might just catch a glimpse of their spirits, forever riding those dusty trails of history, a twinkle in their eyes, a wink on their lips, and a well-aimed shot echoing in the distance. These women may have lived more than a century ago, but their stories, their spirit, and their courage live on, inspiring every new generation with tales of a time when the West was still wild, and the women who lived there were wilder still.